Hi, good evening. Just want to point out to you something very important today. Let's wait for some people to come in. Now, I promised I will be speaking on the subject of crucifying yourself because I'm very disturbed with certain things that's happening to the Philippines today, and also in the Roman Catholic community. Let's wait for some people to come in. Why I want to talk about this is because I'm seeing people literally crucifying themselves on the cross because it's Good Friday. And I want to talk about this topic because I think a lot of Christians don't understand the concept of being crucified with Christ. And therefore, they have no idea basically what it means. As such, what happens is that they mutilate themselves on the cross in the hope of giving thanks to God for whatever He has done, or simply misunderstanding the concept of being crucified with Christ. Let me deal with three passages from you. Let's deal with the first one, which is basically this. Let me read to you. This is from Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to the disciples he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things in the hands of the elders, chief priests, and notice this. I want you to notice this, very important. It says teachers of the law. And then he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him and said, Never, Lord. He said, This shall never happen to you. Jesus said to Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan, or get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. And then Jesus said to his disciples, notice Jesus said to his disciples, If anyone will come after me, he must deny himself, take up the cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will find it. What good it be for a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or can a man give in exchange for his soul? What can a man give for exchange to his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before the Son of Man coming in the kingdom. Guys, first and foremost, when you read a Bible passage, read the whole thing. Look at what Jesus is saying. If anyone were to come after me, he must deny himself and take up the cross. In fact, it says his cross. Notice, I want you to realize the word is his cross. And follow me. Follow me. Follow me. Not take up the cross, but take up his cross. Number two, I want you to also see this. For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and he will reward each person according to what he has done. While that may be speaking to you, but listen to the next verse. I tell you the truth, some of you standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I tell you the truth, some of you who are standing here. Who was Jesus speaking to? His disciples. His disciples. Some of you here don't mean you. It means his disciples. Some of his disciples would not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, in other words, taking up his cross, that means the disciples. Number one, he was speaking to his disciples because this turned out to be a conversation that Peter had with him. And Peter told him, no, you will not go up to Jerusalem. You will not suffer the cross. You will not die in the hands of the teachers of the law. Teachers of the law. Teachers of the law. And I repeat 3 times, because who was going to crucify Jesus? It was the teachers of the law. Then he says, take up your own cross. Take up your own cross. Then he says, Jesus will reward those who, when he comes again. Now listen to this. Some of you will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. In other words, what happens is this. He was speaking to his disciples. He wasn't speaking to you. And he says this, I will tell you the truth. Some of the disciples here who are standing here will not taste before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. In other words, those words are not for you. Those words are for his disciples, who he says, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before the Son of God coming in his kingdom. In other words, what happens is this. Some of them will see death. Some of them will see death. Some of them will see death. The only disciple that did not see death when Jesus came again was John. Because it was promised to John that he will not die until he sees Jesus returns. And those of you who have followed me will know that I have spoken many times that Jesus returned in the year AD 70. Otherwise, this verse will not make sense at all, because it means that some of these people will not see the return of Jesus. Listen to this. For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and he will reward each person according to what he has done. But I tell you the truth, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of coming in his kingdom. In other words, some of them actually saw death. If you are a futurist, this verse would mean none of you have seen death before he comes. Therefore, this verse doesn't make sense if you become a futurist, because this verse actually says some people will die before he comes. Therefore, this verse, take up his cross and follow me, has nothing to do with you. In fact, in context, if you read the next passage I'm about to show you, you will begin to realize what it actually means. What it actually means. Let me turn to you to Galatians 2. Because this is the chapter where people always say that they have to be crucified with Jesus, because Paul was crucified with Jesus. Let me read to you the whole thing in context. The whole thing in context. When Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because clearly he was in the wrong. Before certain men came from James. Notice this. Certain men came from James. And he used to eat with the Gentiles. Who used to eat with the Gentiles? Peter used to eat with the Gentiles. But when these people from James arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. Notice, James belonged to the circumcision group. These were Christians who thought that the law still applied. And therefore they insist on people to be circumcised. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that their hypocrisy, even Barnabas, was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting with the truth of the gospel, that is to say, that Peter should remain with the Gentiles and eat with the Gentiles, I said to Peter in front of all of them, you are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? Jewish customs. Notice this. The hypocrisy there was that Peter knew the law did not exist, but yet when the circumcision group came in, those who believe in the law, what Peter did was left Paul's table, who were eating with the Gentiles, and went to eat with the Jews. And Barnabas followed them. Listen to what Paul says. We who are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners know that a man is not justified by observing the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. For we too have put our faith in Jesus so that we may be justified by faith in Christ and not by observing the law. Because by observing the law, no one will be justified. Now listen to this. If we seek to be justified, it becomes evident that we ourselves are sinners. Does that mean Christ promotes sin? Absolutely not. If I rebuild what I destroy, I prove that I'm a lawbreaker. For through the law, verse 19 says this, I died to the law that I may live for God. I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live. The life I live in the faith of the Son of God who loved me and died for me. And that is the context, people. To be crucified with Christ has nothing to do with putting yourself onto the cross. This is how it sounds like in the Message. Let me show it to you. What actually took place is this. I tried keeping rules and working my head off to please God, and it did not work. So I quit being a lawman so that I could be God's man. Christ's life showed me how and enabled me to do it. I identified myself completely with Him. Indeed, I've been crucified with Christ. My ego is no longer central. It is no longer important that I appear righteous before you to have your good opinion, for I am no longer driven to impress God. Christ lives in me. So you see, my living is not mine, but is lived by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. I'm not going back to the law. Being crucified with Christ has nothing to do with giving up your ambitions, has nothing to do with giving up your life, has nothing to do with putting yourself on the cross. Because being crucified with Christ simply means this, that Paul no longer receives the righteousness that is from the law, but he receives righteousness that is from faith. From faith. You see, it says this, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. In other words, to be crucified with Christ means dying to the law of Moses. Dying to the law of Moses. Recently, there is this crazy self-promoting, absolutely somebody who thinks so highly of himself, said this in criticizing Joseph Prince. He said this, that Christ cut away your flesh, that is your body, so that your soul and spirit does not sin. And it's impossible for your soul and spirit to sin because your body has been cut away. Being crucified or being cut away in the flesh does not mean that God cut away your body. It simply means this, you are no longer in the old covenant and God has removed you from it. Listen to this, the final passage. And this is what I want to say to you guys, okay? Because it speaks about this. I want you to realize that it says this, okay? Let me read to you. I want to know Christ and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in His suffering, becoming like Him in His death, and somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. I want to partake in the sufferings of Jesus. Paul says in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. So many people actually think that this means I have to crucify myself with Jesus in order to have a better resurrection. Guys, can I read to you something in context what it says? This is what it says. Watch out for those dogs. Verse 2. Those dogs are referring to people like those who came from James. People in the circumcision group. Now, those men who are evil, those mutilators of the flesh, how do we become mutilators of the flesh? When people don't understand the context, they always read this and they assume it's sinning. Mutilators of the flesh are people who circumcise you. People who circumcise you. Then Paul says, for it is we who are the circumcision, we who worship by the Spirit of God, who glory in Jesus Christ, put no confidence in the flesh, though I have reasons of such confidence. Now, many people think confidence in the flesh is actually sinning. Let me read to you what Paul says is confidence in the flesh. If anybody thinks he has confidence in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day. This is because of the law, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, which is the smallest tribe, but the royal tribe. See? I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. Again, this is based on the law. In regards to the law, see? A Pharisee. As for zeal, I was persecuting the church. Why? Because of legalistic righteousness. Faultless. Paul's confidence in the flesh was that he was faultless in his legalistic righteousness. For whatever was my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, and for whose sake I lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that is from the law, but that which is in faith in Christ, the righteousness that's come from God and is by faith. Therefore, to partake in the sufferings of Jesus Christ has nothing to do with nailing yourself on the cross, whipping yourself at the back, caning yourself, mutilating yourself. It's just this. To partake in the sufferings of Jesus Christ is to obtain a righteousness from God and not from the law. It is as simple as that. So could I please beg of you people, don't flog yourselves. You can flog yourselves bodily, you can also flog yourselves emotionally. And it's called guilt. Jesus died on the cross so that you don't have to. Jesus died on the cross so that your faith, or rather your guilt, is removed. Let me read to you in Hebrews chapter 10. I'm sorry, I don't have a computer. My computer broke down, so I'm reading from you from the Message. This is the first time I read this from the Message, but listen to this. The old plan, which is the old covenant, was only a hint of the good things of the new plan, which is the new covenant. Since the old law plan wasn't complete in itself, it couldn't complete those who follow it. It's beautiful. No matter how many sacrifices were offered year after year, they never added up to a complete solution. And this is what it says in the NIV. For this reason, the law can never, by the same sacrifices repeated year after year, listen to this, all right? Perfect those who draw near to worship. For the worshippers would have been cleansed once for all and would no longer felt guilty for their sins. Why do we crucify ourselves? Why do we nail ourselves to the cross? It's because basically we feel guilty. We feel that we owe, Jesus something. And as such, what happens is that we nail ourselves to the cross because we have to get rid of this guilt. And this is what it says. The worshippers would have gone merrily on their way, no longer dragged down by their sins, but instead of removing the awareness of sin, when those animal sacrifices were repeated over and over again, they actually heightened the awareness and guilt. This is what the message says. It heightens awareness and guilt. In other words, when you put yourself under the law of Moses, you heighten your guilt. And so these people who crucify themselves, who get themselves nailed on the cross, actually have no idea what the cross is about. The cross is supposed to remove your guilt. And yet, what do? We elevate it. Listen to this. The plan is that the bull and goat's blood can't get rid of sin. That is what is meant by the prophecy put in the mouth of Christ. You don't want sacrifices and offerings year after year. You prepare a body for me as a sacrifice. It is not fragrance and smoke from the altar that whet your appetite. So I said, I'm here to do your will, O God, and the way is described in your book. Now, this is Jesus speaking. Listen to what he says. When he said, you do not want sacrifice and offerings, he was referring to the practices according to the old plan. When he added, I'm here to do it your way, he set aside the first in order to enact the new plan, God's way, by which we are made fit for God by the once for all sacrifice of Jesus. We are made fit by once for all the sacrifice of Jesus. So I beseech you and I beg of you, taking the cross of Jesus has nothing to do with your guilt. It is actually a synonym for persecution. The reason is very simple. If you are a Jew and you have to live the law and follow Christ, you will be persecuted. Because people at that time were people who are worshippers of the Old Covenant. It's basically like in Malaysia, if you are a Muslim and you happen to defect from your faith, people will crucify you. They will come and they will, interesting how I use the word, isn't it? They will crucify you, they will persecute you, they will kill you. That's why Jesus said, follow me. Follow me. You see, in order to follow Jesus, the people under the law will hound you. Thank God, the law doesn't exist anymore. It was removed at the cross. It became obsolete at the cross and eventually totally destroyed when the temple was destroyed. So people, I hope this small little talk actually will benefit all of you. God bless. Afinka, if you can, please make this into a YouTube video so that people will see this. Thank you very much. God bless.